That's Sky today.
Yeah. I think we should talk about what's relevant. No, I'm just kidding. We don't need any more hate and apology episodes. So, but
are you sure?
I'm like 89% sure. Yeah.
All right. Well, that's good.
It's always me doing the apologizing. So,
I'll start apologizing.
You can get a bit fiery sometimes.
I'm sorry that the director likes these cold opens. I'm sorry that I'm passionate and people disagree with me. I'm sorry that you're wrong. No. Yeah, let's so welcome to the Dresden Files, the Dresden Files podcast about the Dresden Files podcast. Something, somebody break a jar already. We're gonna swear. We're gonna swear and spoil stuff. We're gonna talk crazy.
Oh yeah, I think we're going real crazy and esoteric this time.
Yeah.
What do you mean we? Speak for yourself.
There's a little bit of news.
I will drag you down and beat you.
For like the third time, we've got the first chapter of Peace Talks available on jimbutcher.com, which is important because like the next, we're 6 weeks, there's going to be several chapters posted, you know.
Yeah.
I don't remember if it's like actually one per week, just that there will be other chapters posted. So
yeah, I don't know what was said officially, but we'll be getting some chapters before the actual release of the book.
It's a 4 or 5, something like that.
Right. Yep. So there's that. I don't remember, like Badali, I think, is doing another sale.
They're doing the Demon Reach one, the one that they were going to do that they eventually, instead of did the Winter Lady Pentacle, now they're doing the Demon Reach Pentacle that they had already planned on doing, and they're kind of green and pretty looking. More pentacles. Have pentacles.
Hooray.
As the pentacle will travel.
Right. So any other news, or just dive into, what are we calling this? The Outer Gates Part 2? Guardians of the Gates Part 2?
Yeah, that one.
So, yeah, because, you know, we've got to have Baby Groot dancing the intro.
Yeah, this one's going to be a little bit worse and harder to follow, maybe a little bit. Okay, sure.
Nah, I mean,
so tune out now.
Yeah. Thanks for setting that one up, but more rambling, right? So, some of the stuff was, there were some questions raised in the thread where we posted our episode on the subreddit. There was so much more that we could talk about. We kind of wanted to do another Pass of the Cosmology episode, but because this is literally following Guardians of the Gates, then we were just like, let's just roll it all together. One of the things we were talking about prior to the show was like, you know, the nature of angels again and things like that. I guess take it a step back. Like one of the questions that was raised from KNNN,
who has been on the show, also named Josh.
Right.
He's very helpful.
I wasn't going to out him, but you know.
I don't want to give credit.
He always had some good follow-up questions, and you know, some of the stuff was, you know, based on Word of Jim and some just other general questions, but kind of talking about the nature of the gates, and if it's mortals that can open them, why were the angels defending the gates? You know, like if angels predate humans or the gates predate humans, you know, there's some speculation, I guess. There's some room for like, does that mean somebody else could have opened the gates? Does that mean, you know, they were just there because of whatever? And I mean, when I was reading it, one of my first responses was like, well, didn't the Garden of Eden have like walls before everything else? But I'm not sure that it did. So, you know, I wasn't going to carry the fight there. Like the flaming sword definitely came later. You know, after the eating of the fruit and everything. But I imagine it's possible there's some overlap in the storytelling there. You know, some similar ideas. Like maybe it does technically come down to, in the Dresden verse, that once the apple was eaten, that was the real fuck up, was like, you don't realize it yet, but now you have the ability to open the gates and ruin everything. You know, so
that's the argument that they're having.
Well,
it could be.
Yeah.
Well, the argument either way, as far as I am willing, until we see otherwise, is humans in general, that they have the ability. Whether they knew it at the time or not, we are a problem.
Right.
And
I like calling it a security risk. I like thinking of it in the government spooks type of way.
It works
So,
because you can't fix people, you can't fix stupid, and they will always click that phishing spam email.
Right. Yeah.
Those work for a reason.
Single Shoggoths in your area. So,
but I mean, it seems to me the most sensible that the war wouldn't continue going on at the gates if the defenders couldn't be overwhelmed and beaten back and the outsiders couldn't still get in somehow. So I have to imagine that even if the angels were in this presupposed world the first guardians, they would still have to guard because the other side could, for lack of a better word, kick the gate open.
Right.
So that it's always been a little
easier
bit
when you
breached.
have humans. Right. Well, even, doors open for both sides, right? So.
Right. Well, and tying into that, right, in some of the other pre-discussion we were having and where it starts to get weird, for a lot of reasons, and a lot of people, it doesn't come up in the mainstream because it's so weird and difficult to talk about, but I find that it ties in potentially to the Dresden verse pretty handily, is like the nature of angels, and especially with the Dresden verse. Like, I've heard the theory that maybe if outsiders are what was there before, and you had this whole primordial thing, which is a fairly common creation myth anyway, maybe the white god in the Dresden Files is actually like a rogue outsider. Like, he just, in the infinite chaos, it goes back to something we touched on last time. Does chaos always beget order, or does order succumb to chaos? Like, how does that actually work? It's like a chicken and the egg thing. So if we presuppose that it's primordial chaos initially, and then the white god comes along and says, you know what, I'm going to clean up the place. We're going to put all the ectoplasm on that side of the wall, and we're going to put all the nice and white and shiny things in here. We'll make some humans, some animals, whatever. Then he may be, technically an outsider, even though, in chaos, there's enough permutations that maybe eventually somebody gets symmetry. And, in the infinite chaos, maybe you don't have 39 tentacles, you just have 2 bottom ones and 2 top ones, and then we call them arms and legs, something like that. But where it gets interesting though too is like, some people brought up in the subreddit, and we were just looking at the scripture, but like Ezekiel, for example, describes angels as like having eyes on like all of their wings, every surface of their body, their hands, arms, legs, wings. They've got 4 faces. If they change direction, they don't actually turn because they're already facing that direction because they have eyes everywhere. They just move that way. And so, like, if you abstract it from the fact that it's literally a biblical scripture, it sounds very Lovecraft. It sounds very, anything covered with eyes and tentacles kind of falls into his domain a little bit. Because he helped popularize a lot of that. So, from a Dresden verse perspective, I find it kind of interesting. So,
yeah, the possible similarities between angels or divine something and Lovecraft outsiders is certainly weird if there's more of just than, they all have eyes. But what you were saying about Order and Chaos, like what he listed in that subreddit comment of, you really need to read that book, To Reign in Hell. You would enjoy it.
What was the book title?
To Reign in Hell by Stephen Bruce.
Gotcha.
It's basically, thinking about that book and Dresden Files, is they don't contradict each other in any way, but it's like the chaos and the order and how divine anything might have happened, and then the fall.
Right.
Yeah. So I don't know. It was kind of fun thinking this morning about like, this is how all of it could have happened, and it still makes sense with each other.
Right. I mean, and that kind of goes back to one of the main things that I liked about the Dresden Files is that, it unifies a lot of the myths and mythologies in a way that don't clash,
Yep.
Like it's something, I don't know if it's been brought up here, but it's definitely, I've brought it up with some of my D&D group before. It's like in D&D, they assume like all of the creation myths are accurate, right? So that kind of precludes the fact that you've got like Iluvatar from Lord of the Rings or whoever, it doesn't matter, I'm just pulling a name out. He created everything. But then you've got, the Maiar who like, they created elves. And I'm like, well, okay, but did he literally create everything, or did he create the people who created, whatever? And so you kind of run into some of that in the Dresden Files as well. It's like, so like, God, if the white god exists, he's the penultimate creator, right? Or did he create Tiamat, who created dragons? Or did he create, like Corlon, you know, who created elves. Like, which microcosms are we dealing with here? Because, you know, Christianity sets it up that there is one God and he literally created everything. So then to mix in some of those other myths, like you obviously, like, did God create Zeus who created man? Or did God create Odin who created man? Or did God, you know, like they're all the all father, they're all, you know, the big guy in charge, but how does that work, you know?
What if they were all the same thing at one point? Or like, okay, so the white god creates a thing and that thing created other things, but at some point all of those identities split. In the same way that Hecate is one person, but the queens are 6 people, but we all identify as that one person for Hecate.
We're going to need a bigger trinity. So
yes,
you've never seen the white god and Odin and Zeus in the same room at the same time because they're all the same guy, you know.
Exactly.
Right. You're welcome, EG. So she's just gone crazy. I think she really is secretly team everything's a mantle, and you know.
Oh, sure. I can get that way if you want.
So are you, hold on.
Please don't.
This is important. Are you a fan of the one electron theory? Because that's what this is approaching.
I love that theory.
There's actually only Rashid. Rashid is Dresden and Odin and, you know.
And himself and Iluvatar.
And yes.
Oh, yes.
So there's only the one character, but
there's only the one electron. That is why they all have the same charge. It's the one electron in every single thing. It's like all instances at once. Yes, I think it's hilarious and crazy. Unprovable probably, but I love the story.
Right. Okay, well, we've jumped the shark, so I guess that's the end of the episode and probably the show now. But yeah, I mean, it's you know, it's the creation myths and how they intertwine and overlap, and you know, it's an open question for the Dresden Files especially as well. It's like we know that the dragons, at least at one point, you know, they were in control of the elements. So, you know, does that mean that angels don't have a play there? Or, you know, some of those things, like so far as it's been introduced in the Dresden Files, we haven't worried about the cogs and how they bump into each other. We haven't met any of the I'm trying to remember the Greek word for it, but the, you know, like Poseidon's daughters, right? The goddesses of the winds and the storm. Did they bump into the big D dragons who were also in charge of, you know?
Were those the Furies, or is that someone else? Or
no, because the Furies are the Fates, right? So, I mean, some of them may also have been Poseidon's daughters, but he's specifically like, you know, the one that controlled the east wind and the one that controlled the west wind. And, you know, like once you get three tiers down from Zeus, you start getting smaller and smaller domains where it's like, no, she's not the goddess of the wind. She's only the goddess of the west winds, you know, like,
well, even
like
Poseidon himself was not the god of all the oceans. He was just the god of like the Mediterranean, basically.
Probably, yeah.
I mean, was Oceanus was all of it.
Gotcha. Yeah,
I think, if I'm remembering correctly.
Yeah, and I don't know enough about the interaction there to say one way or the other, but yeah, that makes sense. So yeah, I'm curious about how those go. I mean, really, I think it's turtles all the way down, but you know, so
it's the lion turtle from Avatar. Everything is energy bending.
Right. Everything's blood bending if you try hard enough. Sorry.
It can be.
Yeah.
If you're a vampire or a fairy, it's pretty easy.
Right.
I mean, as far as creation myth goes, I think it makes sense for each of them based on this framework to have one, because that gives you more worship, that gives you more power. I mean, it's within their self-interest to have people think that they are the be-all, end-all, even if it's only for a few thousand years.
Right. And that, I mean, that kind of brings up another thing too, because some of these mythologies overlap and some of them are very clearly the dominant, you know, at the time. Like there were almost certainly other tribes out there with other ideas, and in the Dresden verse, because they're worshipped, they're going to have some power, but whether or not it's on the scale that those, you know, let's say uncontacted tribes, whatever you want to call them, for like 5000 BC, there's almost certainly somebody out there that, like, you know, like the Wendigos or whatever other kind of crazy monster thing or god or whatever is out there that they believed in at the time, obviously didn't, you know, make it into like a common acceptance and may not have made it into any form of history that we can, whether it's oral or written or anything else that we can do beyond like point at cave drawings, maybe, in the Dresden verse. That doesn't mean they didn't have power at the time, but what happened? Do they fizzle out? Do they get absorbed? Did they metamorphize?
If they're powerful enough to get noticed by anyone, they probably get taken in, or they get consigned to oblivion. Right.
Yeah, that would be my guess. It's a combination of the three, probably. Like it's all of the above. But yeah, as far as like mashing those creation myths together, like obviously, it also begets like if human belief, if mortal belief is what gives them power, you again kind of follow a chicken and the egg thing. Do they have power because they tricked some humans into worshiping them, or did the human concept give them like life, bring them into existence? In the white gods, case, it definitely seems like he's an entity outside of that, but he is as powerful as he is because of the worship, perhaps. But I mean, when the dude can literally split order from chaos, like that's powerful enough for a lot of ideas.
Well, I think, at least as far as I would venture the guess, is you need the mortal thought basically to exist to have the tether. And then the active worship is what gives you the power. So, it's like when they talk about the Oblivion War, those things are still out there somewhere in the ether or the never, never, but they can't reconnect to the world. So they existed, they just don't have the power, and they might even still have their power, but they don't have a connection because humans don't even think about them anymore.
Right.
Conversely, someone like Odin, who everybody knows, even if they just know the name, so he's got his tether and his power, and he also decided, he's a special case, but just for the sake of argument. So even Zeus isn't as powerful as he was anymore, probably. But at some point, someone in Greece pointed at something and said, hey, that's our god. And then so people started worshiping it. They gave it a name. They gave it the attention and the power. Mm-hmm. But just the thought itself was probably enough to spark something.
Right. I mean, it started out as a lightning bolt, then it was a goose, then it was a cow, then it was sand. I mean, no. Sorry.
I mean, that's why it does make sense that a lot of things like, Odin becoming Kringle, he just adapts. He becomes something new. So it's easy to more or less keep your punch and your hand on the wheel.
Right.
Not everybody else needs that or is going to do that or is interested in that.
Mm-hmm. What was the point of publishing the Necronomicon again? Like to dilute it. To dilute it. But the Necronomicon was like giving ideas of how to contact outsiders, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, so the White Council accomplished their goal, but they were idiots about it as far as everybody else is concerned. Like, not to politicize it, but it's a very American thing to do, right? What they knew about, because they can't know about the other thing, right? They knew that ritual magic can be diluted, especially for some of the lesser powers, by more people calling it. If you turn on all the taps in your house, there's less water pressure is the concept, right? So like there's only, or we could go a network thing, right? There's only so much bandwidth going to your house, and too many people downloading it makes the internet slow.
Is the internet analogy easier than water pressure?
Well, I'm a nerd, so yeah.
Either way.
Yeah, we got them both covered. So yeah. So the idea is that, when you try and summon something from the Necronomicon, it doesn't really work because the lines are busy. Because too many other people are doing it. But the problem is they also fucked consigning those guys to oblivion, because they can't know about the Oblivion War because they're mortal, and that in and of itself would give them power. Like it goes back to backup again. We can't let Harry know because Harry is a very powerful wizard, and him knowing by himself is enough to give these things purchase, let alone the whole fucking White Council, and what that looks like.
The Necronomicon is giving directions to contact outsiders, right?
Mm-hmm. I mean, it's among other things, it's the Book of the Dead. I don't know how much is like actually, it depends on like the story we're in right now, like what it actually contains, right? So, but anyway,
it seems like if it was like, this is how you contact he who walks behind, maybe someone shouldn't have let that be published.
Right.
Or fuck with it.
But that's also, I mean, that could be a big part of it, right? how many people in the White Council would know that, and how many in the White Council would believe it? Harry fucking knows better, but only because he literally saw the gates. But up until that point, he thought they were a metaphor. Outsiders, he's listed as just powerful demons multiple times. So like, other than maybe the senior council, who would know better?
Well, maybe not even, because the way Rashid makes it sound is the council knows very little about what he does in general.
Right.
I have to imagine that makes sense for one reason, but that invites then someone like, I don't know, a Arthur Langtry type who thinks he's the smartest guy in the room, and he's like, well, this is what we're going to do, and he doesn't know any better.
Yeah, and I mean, and you can also make the argument for degrees, right? Like, I'm sure that publishing the Necronomicon set back the Venatori by centuries, right? But did it save centuries worth of anguish by having these powerful rituals running around otherwise? Like, yeah, sure, great. We're going to, in our immortal lifetimes, you've now set us back some kind of noticeable time frame that we're going to have to deal with now. But we saved mortals for 300 years, versus a bunch of craziness too. Like it depends on the perspective you're looking at, right? Like from the Venatori, it was a setback and it was a stupid thing to do, but the White Council still did accomplish a powerful goal, which is to sap most of these rituals. I say most because I imagine there is some creature in there. There's some ritual that doesn't have the same limitations, but
it's got to. We've seen walkers come here.
Right.
I mean, we've seen outsiders come. The Reds called up an army of them, or at least a supplemental army of them.
Right.
So there's got to be other things, other ways. Maybe you can't call up Cthulhu because of this thing being published, but if you can get his smaller, younger brother, well,
right.
What'd you really accomplish?
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's definitely like, would you rather be nuked or hit by a Moab? Like, the destruction is comparable on a certain scale. Like,
well, to you personally.
Yeah. Right. So, but yeah.
How many people do you think actually know about the Outer Gates? Because we got that question of, does the archive, I assume that the archive knows about the gates and that Winter is protecting it, but why did they try to eradicate fairies when they're the people protecting the gates?
Right.
Well, it depends on when they tried. I mean, if you go by the whole Gutenberg printing press and the Brothers Grimm, and they tried around then that was fairly recently in comparison to thousands and thousands and thousands of years ago. But I have to imagine, if it's got people like Thomas and Laura in it, maybe Laura's a little more clued in now, depending on how much her dad knew. I doubt Thomas knows that they're necessarily a physical thing like that. So I have to imagine the major powers. Your Odin obviously would. The mothers, of course, know. The angels know.
Did Aurora?
I mean, if Molly knows, I have to imagine Aurora would have. I have to imagine the lady has some general idea.
Does Molly know? I don't remember it saying. Okay.
Cold case. When she.
Because Carlos described insiders versus outsiders.
Well, he knows about outsiders. I don't remember that he brings up the gates. I know she and Matt talk about it.
It wasn't the gates, I guess. I was just remembering that he was describing the sleeper as being the insider. Like, he understood how they were the similar relation.
Right. I just know she and Matt have the conversation. She asks her point blank to consider the outer gates, and so that's what they talk about, the whole reason that she has to recruit changelings.
But it's also it's kind of like intellectus, right? So she considers it, meaning she has access to the knowledge.
Right.
Does not necessarily mean that the previous mantle holders did that, because it's a conscious decision. Like, Maeve could give two fucks, so maybe she didn't ever know the score because she never stopped to consider it. I know it's thin, right? I'm not saying like it's super likely, but it's possible that she never dove that into it. It's more like Mom said, clean up my room, and I said, fuck you for 300 years, Well,
it seems to me more at a minimum on the Winter side, they're going to know. It's kind of like Winter Law. You just know it.
Sure.
Harry doesn't because he's still immortal and he doesn't have to necessarily, except when it bites him in the ass.
Right.
But it's like Molly when she can't even speak certain things or do certain ways. Like, she's just going to know this shit. Now, Summer, I guess you could make the argument that they only have to know so much as it takes to counter Winter in their role. But I would argue that Summer then has to know the whole deal, because they have to know, like, I have to imagine Titania, I know Mother Summer knows, she goes there. I have to imagine Titania knows, based on, one, their conversation, him and her and Harry, and two, just if she's going to be a counter check to Mab, she has to know that Mab going off the rails is a bad thing for any number of reasons.
Well, and isn't Lily's the one that gave her the name, right? So, or gave Harry the name Nemesis. So,
right, which she would have gotten from Maeve.
Titania gave the name Nemesis, and then he asked the mothers about it, and so you can say adversary. That's a word that we can use.
Right,
as well.
Lily called it a contagion, and she knew enough to know that it was there and what it did, allegedly.
Right.
Maybe her.
But I mean that's kind of a big deal, though, too. Like, we're talking about the queens, not the ladies necessarily, like, not definitively the ladies anyway, and then the mothers for sure, because they've been to the gates, and then select senior council members might actually know the truth. So it's not super common, like, I wouldn't be. Yeah, I can kind of buy Ramirez because we don't know for sure, but it's likely that he's the captain of the Wardens now, or something pretty close to, because Morgan's not there. Lucio's kind of, possibly still out, or at least a figurehead. So somebody's actually fulfilling the duties, and we don't know truthfully who that is at the moment. But since Ramirez is being tasked with security for peace talks, it's very likely that he is, if not the captain, he's, like the right hand or inner circle or something along those lines.
He's like what Morgan would have been.
Yeah.
I mean, he's probably like the front line captain. I have to imagine Lucio's going to keep the honorary title at a minimum.
Yeah, she's the politician
until she goes. I mean, if I had to guess, I would imagine Ebenezer knows the gates are actually a real thing, as both his job as the Black Staff and
considering he's technically allowed to call them if he wanted to. Yeah.
Right.
So I don't know that, necessarily Ancient Mai, for instance, knows that they're a thing.
Right. I see. Yeah, I just have a tough time with that, because I just imagine that most of the movers and shakers from the Battle of Sicily, for example, would know. So that means Ebenezer, Rashid, obviously, Langtree was involved, right? We got those for sure. But maybe not Listens to Wind or Martha Liberty.
Martha Liberty, though, in Summer Nights, so what he was meant to be,
right?
And like, going back to the journal microfiction of calling him a destroyer, it's like she seems to know the risk that Harry could pose as being a Starborn with the Outer Gates and all that shit.
I mean, I could see Ebenezer's little block of friends knowing, even if he told them, for the sake of trust and needing to know Maggie, this kind of shit.
Margaret.
Well, yeah, I have to imagine Margaret probably knew.
Right. I mean, she was kind of sleeping with Lord Wraith, and he definitely knows. So, or at least knows enough that they are a super powerful demon that he summons.
Well, he's protected by He Who Walks Behind, right? That's why he's invulnerable to magic. So
he's got. But supposition.
Harry also
definitive.
Right. Again, Harry knew about the Walker as well, being beset by the Walker multiple times and destroying him, quote unquote. But that doesn't mean that Harry knew he was an outsider. He just knew he was a powerful demon up until, like, Ghost Story? Like, then he realized that, holy shit, he was an outsider and a knight.
Well, White Knight. Like, yeah, that was White Knight.
Is it, because we kind of revisit the fighting in Ghost Story. That's
Lash tells him in the freeze brain moment that they're outsiders, that He Walks Blind is a knight among their ruling class, this, that, and the other thing.
You're right, because she's the one that tells him. Yeah. Okay. Mm-hmm. Yeah, but even still, so we're 9 books in before Harry knows. So,
well, even Ebenezer, when he's talking in Bloodrights, doesn't know enough to know whether or not it's an outsider protecting him, because he rattles off several options. He could be this, could be a big damn demon. He doesn't know for sure what it is.
Right.
Now, it makes sense based on what we know about how magic interacts with outsiders. If it's just kind of fizzling out or sliding off him, it would fit. But I could see you not wanting to put your lips to that to know for certain if you don't know for certain.
Right. Yeah. How do you identify that kind of magic? Do you lick it? Is that the scientific protocol?
I don't.
Is it Mordite? Blah, blah, blah.
Why does Mordite show up so often when like that's what he says. It's from the outside. That's why it's so antimatter explosive, right?
Well,
Well,
it only
yeah,
shows up
there's
3 times.
3. I was thinking twice. Was it
There's
Okay,
the
so-
archive pulls it out for the duel. There's
Right.
the Peabody using it, and there's
Yep.
Hades' crown.
Oh, right. Yeah, the crown.
Yeah, the crown is the one that stood out to me. It seems very not like the other two.
Yeah, but like the gods,
I was gonna say, yeah, that's if you want
Right.
to show that you're fucking badass.
I get that part.
Yeah.
It was just like it's being used as a threat by people who are extremely powerful and actually like using it to attack the White Council, and then he's using it as a crown. And yes, it's the he's showing off how badass he is. How many people actually have access to summoning Mordite?
The real question is, do you summon Mordite, or did a Mordite asteroid crash into Wakanda and they just have a corner on the market of all the Mordite? So
Well, I mean, you consider the comparison Hades makes between himself and Harry. What if he actually was more or less the guardian if and when the Greeks had the hold on it? And so he would have it. He could have had it any number of ways by dint of that role.
maybe Spot goes out and he plays with a Mordite ball, and like that, he brings that back, and then they just like chip off a little bit off.
I mean,
the
it's
ball.
also, they give it the colloquial name of Deathstone, and what it does, it makes sense for a god of death to be interested in it.
right.
It's
It's
instant
currently-
touch vaporization. I mean,
Well,
Right.
he's god of
Who
the
wouldn't want that?
underworld. It's not exactly the god of the cause of death.
granted, but I mean, it's still the connotation is with him.
Right. I mean, if that's the case, then Mother Winter being the cord cutter, is that one of her jars on the wall?
The jar of Mordite. Maybe
Yeah.
that's what Wormwood is.
Right.
Maybe Wormwood's
So-
just one big fucking thing of Mordite.
Yeah, it's a mist fiend with Mordite in it. Like,
Wormwood is actually a plant, and it's supposed to have hallucinogenic properties. The thing that I always thought was it's going to be something that basically does the third eye thing of like ripping open everyone, and you have to see everything that it is now.
Well, it depends. If it goes the biblical route, that it was a star and it poisoned all the waters. That's what Wormwood was.
right.
Which
I mean, you're
seems a
both
little
right.
more, world endy. But
Right.
What is it thing that Mab said in Small Favor? The stars will fall from the sky before Mab keeps not her word.
Right.
yes, before Mab fulfills not her word.
Okay.
Yeah. That's never coming up. Come on, we could just that's a
Never,
throwaway
not once,
line.
not once
Yes,
going to be
that's
relevant
not
to any
important.
of
That's
the
a very
book
favorite-
titles.
That's a very favorite theory of people's.
Empty Night is not at all a thing we got to worry about, especially with it being one of the books titles of the BAT.
Definitely not.
Just don't lose any sleep over that. I mean, Hell's Bells, Stars and Stones. Jeez.
I really think there's something to the fact everyone is Rashid theory, I'll call it now, because like the little bit
I'm so sorry, everybody. This will be my last episode. I'll stop empowering her delusions.
No, you
Well,
won't. You
the
can't.
little
help
bit that
yourself.
I know of was, I guess I'll call it anthropology. When I was taking Norse classes and talking about the creation myth that they have in the Norse thing, like there was Ymir the giant, and Odin and his brothers defeated the giant, and people came out of his body parts for random ways, and then they used the pieces of his body to create the land and the waters and the earth, and have dwarves holding up the sky. Well, the Greek mythology, there was a giant too, Kronos. He was something like that, and then they
Titan.
made things from him, people and other gods. It seems like there these similarities, and at least those two examples, just like the Hecate is one person and the queens are 6 people. If they were all actually the same thing and the stories just got altered slightly, And there are other things I've been told are really similar between creation myths of like there's a king and a priest and a cow. For some reason, cows almost always show up.
We must be talking about Indian myths.
Possibly.
I mean, it makes sense.
Autumnla is the one in the Norse mythology. She's there and she licks the leg or something, and then people fall out. It's weird.
I mean, it follows loosely with the whole adaptation thing, you know, waste not, want not. You take this shit that was and you turn it into something new.
Yeah.
So.
And then if you keep it discrete to certain locations, like, okay, so maybe the Norse people made Scandinavia and the Greek people made the Mediterranean. And so it's true, but it's not, because that was home and that was their world.
Maybe.
And they just didn't care about the other ones.
I have to believe that mortals, since we all have free will and we all have souls, and that's a big angel thing, have to be sort of a common thread back. Now, whether or not certain pantheons had responsibility over certain sects for a while, and because I believe he had a word to Jim once upon a time that the gods kind of got a little uppity and they were doing things they shouldn't have been doing, and so they had to take a step back also as part of what was going on.
That's interesting.
But if that was the case and everyone just kind of like had their own, which makes sense. Again, you want your power. If you have the job of the guardian, you need your control. So if you start getting out of hand, out of line, that is also going to be a problem.
You need a Titania to possibly destroy you both.
Right. Well, I mean, it makes, as far as the creation of the Sidhe, it makes perfect sense to me that A, the worship problem, B, the checks and balance problem, you know, all of this fits. Is like you keep having this thing over and over and over, history repeating itself, where you lose power and influence and the gates are vulnerable. Somebody comes in, maybe the gates are vulnerable, this, that, and the other thing, so you want a more permanent guardian. And if the pantheons just keep fucking up, because plenty of them have their own internal problems, if not all of them to some degree. I mean, I don't think there's a single major pantheon that doesn't have some sort of infighting and major battle between the gods.
Yeah, if they have personalities, then they clash. If they just like there was nothing and now there's something and there is no other personalities and there's very little clashing.
Right. Well, Egypt, it was what, Set and Ophasis were the two big major antagonists. The Norse obviously had Loki and the giants. Zeus and them had the Titans, but they also had themselves that they just kept fighting against. So
in a lot of them, I mean, even if it's not directly fighting, the disparate elements usually have like contention, you know, and a lot of that is about striking the balance, right? You can't have the balance without them pushing against each other to maintain, you know. So
well, and even in mortal warfare, I mean, how many gods were involved on different sides of the Trojan War according to that mythology?
Right.
So yeah, I mean, okay. I mean, it's not like winter and it's not like fairies don't have infighting, but they also have a little more of a commonality. Like, here's our job, here's our job. We can fight each other, but you know, at the end of the day, the big boys are going to keep their pants on and make sure everything's working, which is supposed to be Meb and Titania. The ladies can do whatever they want because they just suck.
Well, Winter Lady seems to have a job that's very understandable. She is the recruiter and she keeps the peons in line. Sounds like. What the Summer Lady does, I don't know.
Arts and crafts. So
I tend to be of the opinion that, and we saw possibly hints of it already in Christmas Eve, but I felt this was going to be the case long before this, was one that Sarissa was going to be good for Titania and sort of, you know, bring her back on track. But two, that she and Molly were going to end up working closely together, and that was more of there would be more potential for concert and harmony between the ladies because they're the closest ones to the mortal world and they're the least powerful, so they would have the most flexibility. And we already saw Lily and Maeve doing it. Even if one of them was being led astray, they were still able to do it.
Right.
Whereas Meb and Titania, even forgetting even their personal history, just seemed like their mantles won't even consider the option.
Well, I mean, going back to like Summer Night, right? Like they were in opposition up until the climactic, and then of course Titania's feel bads got hurt, so she put that emotional skin in the game. But up to that point, it's more like, don't bother me, the machines are moving. It's machinations of power rather than they want to be doing this. Mab has to defend the table, and Titania has to answer her, even though neither of them actually set the wheels in motion, because it was really Aurora and Slade. And then once Aurora gets killed, it's like, of course I know it has to have happened. That doesn't mean that I don't, want to burn you alive for making it happen. So yeah, just.
Plus, I mean, it makes sense to be dispassionate at that level, because sisters or not, there could come a day where Titania has to take her out and take herself out with her. So you don't want that problem of maybe deciding, well, maybe we can work it out if she's actually gone off the rails.
Right.
Because that's no good for everything. So if it's like, Dragon Ball Z and Goku keeps letting Frieza go, that doesn't really help anyone.
This is what happens if I bring up anime in the pre-show.
Yep. It's your fault.
So slight pivot, unless you guys have got something else going on there. So one of the other things that came up, mostly from Josh again, but just kind of the same idea. It's even addressed by Jim in Words of Jim, and I think a little bit from Uriel, is that it seems like, so I mean, Harry's the fulcrum. We're kind of getting the gist of that through Word of Jim and as the story unfolds and everything. And it seems to be that Earth, especially our Earth, as a result, is kind of important to that. So does that mean that the other Earths don't have gates, or they don't have fulcrums, or how does that all kind of unfold? Because especially if you look at the archangels, like definitely the archangels, but maybe the angels entirely, and the fact that they can either see and or operate in the entire multiverse instead of just these singular instances. Like Mab is probably our Mab, right? And then there are multiple Mabs, but there's only one Uriel. How does that play out with the Earths? Is the same battle taking place on all of the Earths, or only ours is in danger? And because ours is in danger, the whole multiverse is in danger. Like, what do you think about that?
Well, that's an accomplishment.
I tend to think that if there are, so we know Mirror is going to be an alternate reality. So I have to imagine if they get in, for instance, in that reality, then that reality ceases to be, but it doesn't span across all realities. So like, for instance, when Demon Reach was slated to be jailbroken in Cold Days, and they were describing it as the end, if that happens, I don't think that means the end for all reality and all time in all space. I think it means, for all intents and purposes, the important thing, which is our story, ends. So I would say it's more like the gates exist everywhere, but they're all kind of just windows and reflections from the one outside. You know what I mean?
Right. Well, and kind of the nature of the outsiders belies the fact that, I mean, like, for example, if the White God and the Archangels are multiversal, or however you want to call it, that they can exist in all points in time, maybe the outsiders can as well. My initial thought was that it was more like, forgive me for blending my nerd stuff again, but like the Blood War from D&D, where it's like you've got the chaos of the Abyss, for example, and the Abyss is just endless. It's bubbling chaos, and that just there is no end. And if they invade a world, then that world falls, but they have to invade each world individually. That was kind of my initial thought process. But I want to say there was something that I read at one point that was like, if they get in any single world, is basically game over. But I guess the argument could be made, is it immediately game over, or is it more like that's the beginning of the end, because they would be inside the multiverse, and how do we stop them at that point? So is it like we poked a hole in a balloon and eventually the whole thing's going to fill up, or is it like the balloon popped and it's just game over?
I I think it would take an awful amount of luck and an awful amount of convenience that the outsiders haven't been able to get in anywhere else ever.
Right. Yeah. So yeah, just kind of interesting. And then, spreading out the multiverse theory a little bit, like one of the things that I use to shape my understanding of that, whether it's accurate or not, but it's one of the rules that I follow, is that because if the multiverse is literally, infinite choice is infinite diversity and infinite combinations, once again mixing, but if it's all of these things, right, then if you can think of it, then there is a multiverse where it's happened. So, in one universe, it's not Dresden and the Scoobies, it's Dresden and the Avengers, and he's Iron Man, and whatever. And it's literally indistinguishable for those things. But I prefer where this comes back to being grounded in some kind of reality is that I think that there's local levels of your infinities, right? It's more common for there to be like, okay, so there's the multiverse as we know it, then there's evil Dresden because he made the bad choice in proven guilty, so we know that's coming, right? But then there's the multiverse where Dresden died. Sorry, Grave Peril, you're right. My bad. So Grave Peril. Then there's the multiverse where Dresden died, and so Elaine became the fulcrum because she had the potential, but there can only be one anyway. So really, it's Elaine is the fulcrum, right? And then there's the one where Elaine and Dresden died, so it's Rashid is the fulcrum, right? So like these are they're very identical to ours, but there's like one major difference, or there's one choice difference. And so, like, do these become pocket multiverses, pockets of this thing where it's like, if Dresden fails here, it's not like the end of all creation, kind of like what we were saying. It's like if he could get in anywhere, it'd be the end of everything. Or is it just the end of like 139 of them because they are that connected or that local? It goes back to Jet Li's The One again as well, where it's like there are like 250 of you, and there's one where you're gay, one where you're a woman, one where you've got blonde hair for some reason, just whatever else. But there only so many that you actually exist in, because there's the one that you got killed as a child. There's the one where DeMorn threw the baseball too hard. There's the one where you got hit by the car. There's the one where in the Full Moon Garage you didn't get saved. The Dresden Files that we have in the scope of the multiverse is almost like the Brightest Timeline version, right? Because how many times did he get lucky to survive this long? Which means every single one of those instances is a multiverse that he doesn't exist. It's some where he died initially and some where he only died later still, like where he got lucky 9 out of 10 times instead of all 10. So it could be that there's some overlap there, but I mean, that's the problem I have with like the multiverse theory and true infinity. Which barn is full of real fake doors, and Dresden's the real fake door salesman, and which one is them as slug people, and which I'm generating
Telephone
universes
people.
right now. So what was that, director? Telephone people?
Yeah.
Nice.
Chair people.
It's Harry Dresden, million ants in his eyes. So, yeah. E.g., not picking up any of the references. So,
don't watch it. Don't care.
Yeah, can't wait till next week. So.
I know enough to know what it is, what you're saying, which is just reinforcing. I have no need to watch it.
The director's like, I finally get a reference that E.g. doesn't.
Yes.
It finally happened.
That's when I suggested that topic, and his response
eventually.
just, ew. It's like, this is fun. Awesome.
Right.
So
I mean, I guess there isn't ultimately a point, but that's one of the rules that I try to apply with universes. Is like the ones that have the least amount of change are what I would refer to as local, and then you get the ones where it's like, so dramatically different. Where we have Harry Dresden never got taught by Justin DeMorn, but it was instead adopted by Alfred. And now we're mixing universes, because if Dresden belongs anywhere, it's the Marvel universe. But, so you get stuff like that, but because it can be thought of and whatever, maybe there was a way to get there. Maybe 3,000 years ago, somebody made a different decision that led down this crazy ass path that wound up with him being Batman.
Infinites, because at every single moment when someone makes a decision, it's different.
Right.
And the real many worlds things, like every single moment where an electron could be in a different spot, is a
It
different.
is. Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, the one electron across many infinite universes.
Right. Right.
So there has to be some sort of locality to have effects. So probably several, even just like a small 100 amount of them, probably having the ripples of Demon Reach getting attacked.
Right.
That was probably something like that could be found. Bob didn't have a chance to go into those dimensions to be able to see if it was happening, but they probably were. I mean, if bad things can happen, it's probably gonna.
Sure.
I personally, I almost would rather ascribe the fact that Demon Reach and its creation makes it more similar properties to Uriel than it is local, because it's created in so many different points in time and dimensions. It is a microcosm to itself, right?
Yes.
It is a point where these overlap potentially.
Well, if we go by what we said last time, that beings that have intellectus are the multiversal ones, that would include Demon Reach, even if it's only located there, right there.
Yeah.
How far back did Merlin go in time to do the oldest point of the first time he made Demon Reach and the at least 5 times he did it?
I understand what you're asking, and the question or the answer is yes. So we don't know because we're too dumb, but also yes.
Right.
So
so how far back is that first point where it might have been different? So he made Demon Reach.
Infinity fun.
Well, you can't go so far back.
How many people are Rashid? Damn it!
He can't go so far back that the Earth was inhospitable to life, and he can't have gone so far back that you couldn't even breathe. I would imagine.
But you could have been around for dinosaurs.
Right.
And he made that's
but even
a thing that unifies it from before Sue, but when oxygen was around and not at lethal level, he does the first point, and it's like a bottleneck of all of the things that can happen are going to be at least from this point branching.
So does he go back to when Demon Reach itself manifested, or does he go back further to when Earth didn't have liquid oceans? Well, I would start with that.
It depends a little bit on the nature of Demon Reach, whether or not we assume he's his own thing that got co-opted, or if he was created.
Right.
I thought he was created.
Well, it could have been a naturally occurring spirit that was just sort of given purpose to do this thing. Kind of like how the Shi were created.
I would imagine he came with the ritual, but yeah, I don't know. There's a lot of unanswered question there for sure.
Infinite questions.
Right.
Well, we know his limp comes from
a glacier.
Losing, the Ice Age. So
he's that old.
If he existed before that, there you go.
Right.
Yeah.
It does. I mean, once you're 20 to 40,000 plus years back, it does kind of become academic for our purposes, because that's that's almost an order of magnitude older than, any form of human history. So written.
Well, it also depends on how Merlin accomplished it. If it was his own power, then he's scary enough. But if he had, angelic
cosmic
help, for
power.
Instance, right. If he had that kind of thing, if a dragon helped him, something that was moving along continents, that this kind of power, you could, at that point, then you probably even could go back to when the oceans were just fucking methane, because it wouldn't matter.
Right. Yeah, it just becomes a question of what ultimately is Demon Reach and what did it look like? Because the island, presumably, in this case, it may be that it was just part of the land that didn't get carved out by the glacier, right? And that's why it's an island instead of just like a plateau or just flat land or whatever. But if you go back far enough, almost certainly the topology has shifted. Certainly if you're going back billions of years.
Yeah, if you're going back to dinosaur time to set it up, then the continents were not in the same shape, right?
Well, it was also Pangea way back when, and then before the split.
Right. The other thing that we haven't talked about yet and kind of gives us another idea along those lines is the way that the wards work, especially on the lighthouse. They're, for all intents and purposes, according to Harry, impossible. And it may be that they're impossible because they're sort of tesseracted on each other through multiple dimensions, and the ability of being able to use the sight to see that shit, is how he's able to tell, and that's how it exists in multiple points in time in multiple multiverses, and that because of the nature of the wards, they're feeding off of each other. Like this is obviously a huge amount of speculation, taken with a grain of salt, but that may give another kind of clue. Certainly doesn't solve the riddle, but it may be that he did ultimately write it this way, and you have to ensnare and protect it from outsiders, because again, if Uriel is multiversal and outsiders are at least multiversal because of similar power levels and shit like that, then the prison in which to contain them would need to be maybe. Otherwise, they would just slip out through the fourth dimension or seventh dimension or whatever and go for a stroll,
Well, and he says the work predates history as it's known. So,
which that could be like 10,000 years, but
sure.
We know it's older than that because glaciers. So, but
well, the way he says it, this work, the actual spells on the stone, comes from before even the predecessors of the White Council. I am conversant in the course and application of the art since the golden age of Greece. This stuff, whatever it is, it's older.
Nice. Yeah. Fun. Shake it loose.
Mesopotamia.
What about it?
Mesopotamia. Excuse me.
Older than Greece, right? Cradle of civilization.
Okay.
Also where the outsiders seem to be.
Mm-hmm.
And all the things with eyes. So maybe the spells come from that. Right? And like if he was getting cosmic, divine, angelic help, maybe it also is coming from the shit Enoch was seeing.
Maybe.
Right.
It depends also how much he knows about Egyptian stuff, because that would have predated.
Good point. But
right.
Justin used Egyptian words.
Sure. And I have no doubt that Bob doesn't have a general knowledge of Egyptian stuff that would make sense. But if we're going by a literal, what you would consider the golden age of Greece, then, that
the golden age of
a decent amount of history still in places. China, Egypt, Samaria, India, even a little bit.
So the real question is, how old is the dragon turtle, and how many people did he teach to airbend and firebend before?
Zero people.
Before the Greece.
They couldn't be trusted.
Yeah.
He taught Poseidon's 4 daughters because they wanted to blow wind at each other from different sides.
So, has it been an hour already?
Just about. All right. Do we have enough crazy thoughts to try to do this again, or do we get more grounded next time?
Depends on how many people we have.
Yeah, I think you're grounded.
I'm not allowed to talk
it's
about
the
Rashid.
multiverse we have.
Oh, you're not.
Yeah, no. All right, so next time we're going to come up with a different topic so that we can spare you from the time traveling Rashid theory.
Okay, let's do mantles and free will.
We already did mantles and free will.
We can do it again.
Let's do it again.
People have some.
Yeah.
Do they though?
Yes, at least 2 people have some free will or mantles. So
okay.
Yeah. At least 2, I'd wager. So
I'll go up to 6.
Ooh. It's a bold move.
All right. But next week we are annoying EG with Rick and Morty.
Yes.
That's a different podcast.
Sure. I said next week. I didn't say next time.
Because we recorded our first episode last week and it literally didn't exist. I mean, I think we talked about it a little bit, right? So we actually have a new podcast with, other people than just us, even sometimes.
The one person that was new.
Yeah. Well, I mean,
if you're including Rick and Morty, you can replace me with probably 5 other people who actually give a shit about that show for some reason.
Yes, but we like your unhappy sounds. That's why I keep talking about Rashid.
Yeah. I'm going to be
your
on
buttons are easy. They're really big. There just aren't so many of them. So
yeah. We're doing more things. You can watch us argue about other crazy interdimensional shit that aren't Dresden explicitly related, but we will have tangents, we will. Of course we will.
It's us.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So there's more shit. Is there anything else we need to plug?
So this has
we
been the
don't have
Broken
anything
Jars
else.
Network. Are we still doing the drive-through RPG thing?
I think so. Still have the links everywhere.
So click on the link for the drive-through RPG. Join us next week for While We Weren't Recording, our
Which
new
we
podcast.
record.
Yes, I know. It's just so weird. And that's it. I'm out.
Yeah.
Peace.
Okay.